Ladies and gentlemen, comrades and friends, welcome to the second episode of Tintswalo's Perspective. Today we have a special guest by the name of Comrade Manoshe Maphatsoe, who I'll bring on the space in a few minutes. And we'll be discussing workers' rights and improving their working conditions. We'll be reflecting on the state of um, workers' rights and their working conditions in the last 30 years. Welcome to this episode. Remember, this is Tintswalo's Perspective. It's a platform that is meant to amplify the voice of young people so that they can share their experiences of the last 30 years, but also the work that they do in transforming society. So, you're welcome to today's episode. Once again, we apologize about the network challenges that we had in the last episode that we had. We hope today that everything will go smooth. Please go tell your friends to tell their friends and their friends to tell their friends that Tintswalo's Perspective is live. We are live on Facebook, we are live on Twitter, and we are live on our YouTube channel. So, without wasting any time, I'm going to bring Manoshe to come and join me so that he's able to introduce himself. We're quite deliberate here that we don't want to introduce our guests. We want them to introduce themselves so that you can hear it from the horse's mouth as to who they are and the work that they do. Comrade Manoshe, welcome to Tintswalo's Perspective. Can you kindly please just try and open up your camera before I give you a platform to introduce yourself?
No. Thanks, Comrade Giffens. Before you, it's Comrade Lehlohonolo Daniel Maphatsoe, known as Manoshe, a worker leader, the national chair of a union that organizes workers within the municipal sector, known as SAMU. I'm the national chair of SAMU Young Workers, but I'm also the national deputy chair Comrade Giffens. I think my network is not proper, man. We keep on losing each other here.
Yeah, can you kindly just close off your camera and then let's try again?
Okay. Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible. I can hear you loud and clear.
No. Thanks once more, Comrade Giffens. Before you, it's Comrade Lehlohonolo, known as Manoshe Maphatsoe, the national chair, SAMU Young Workers National Chair, but I'm also the national deputy chair of a structure known as COSA, Young Workers, which is a structure established ensure that labor move appeals to the young workers or young people that are entering the labor market. So I know that Comrade Kiffen said that the structure itself doesn't form part structure that itself. It is still new into the broader politics of a mass democratic movement. But I'm leading a structure, Comrade Giffen said, that an assessment that was done to say labor movements are slowly losing relevance in terms of appealing to the young people that are entering the labor market. So therefore, the National Conference of COSATU took a progressive resolution to then establish a structure known as COSATU Young Workers. But primarily was to say this structure must then be at the center of leading campaigns and recruitment drive, so that we are able to then organize the young people that are entering the labor market, so that COSATU as a federation itself is able to then be able to find expression and reflect on challenges that are affecting the young people that are entering the labor market. Because I would say to you that, Comrade Geffen, that COSATU, it's finding it difficult to then appeal to young people that are entering the labor market, because we'll find a young person that says, no, why must I join a trade union? Because I have legal-wise, I have other,
Comrade Manoshe, let me stop you there.
Yeah.
Let me stop you there. We will delve in some of the matters that you are raising. And thank you for giving us this background context to this structure that you are leading. But before we get there, I would just like to get to know you a bit. Who's Comrade Manoshe, and how did you come to lead different structures that you're leading? Where did your activism start? So that we get to know you first as a person before we delve in the work that you do.
No, look, the structure that I lead, which is COSATU Young Workers, originates from the existence of COSATU itself, where COSATU had to conduct an assessment in terms of the federation having to lose relevance in terms of attracting young people that are entering the federation. Therefore, the national conference had to take a resolution to say it is therefore important to establish this structure that will then be able to mobilize and organize young people that are entering the labor market. And we are one of those young people that were identified in the labor movement. We are one of the young people that were identified into labor politics to say, how do we then advance and champion the interest of workers? And it is important to then be able to establish this young worker structure that will speak to issues of young people. So a trade union it is therefore important to then to reflect to these issues of young people. So we are one of those generations that were identified to then be able to ensure the sustainability of the federation.
So in the federation identifying you, what were you busy with? What were you doing? What informed this identification you speak of? I mean, for example, if you were to ask me, how did you get here? How did you get to be part of the OR Tambo School of Leadership? I would tell you that I was active in the student movement. I joined SASCO in 2014 at WITS and started leading through the structures of SASCO and got into student governance. And at some point, I was the SRC president. So I just like to know just a brief history of your activism within and without the mass democratic movement.
Now, if you look at the historic background of COSATU itself, you will understand that COSATU as a revolutionary federation is grounded in the mass democratic movement, and the structure of young workers never existed before. However, in 2009, Comrade Giffens, in the National Conference of COSATU, I know that Comrade Lulamile, Comrade Xolani Fakude, and a number of comrades welcome, Comrade Lulamile. I see you are commenting to say you are here. The idea was as a result of the National Conference resolution of COSATU in 2009, where a study was conducted, Comrade Giffens, that more than 30%, if not 40%, of the current labor force will be out of the workforce. And how do we sustain the relevance of COSATU? So it is on those bases that we need to then establish a structure that will then be able to sustain the relevance of COSATU young workers in the interest of advancing and advocating for a national democratic revolution within COSATU itself. So it was on those bases that we can't allow a situation where COSATU can't have a succession plan in terms of those that will then be able to continue advancing for a national democratic revolution.
No, thank you very much, Comrade Manoshe. You know, the way you are deviating from this question, you are reminding me of one old comrade. You see, when you want to see that a person is a commissar, they always shy away of speaking about themselves. You know,
Yeah.
this is I've failed 3 times, so I'll move from there. But the idea was, you know, for people to get to know Manoshe and to understand that this person does not emerge out of nowhere, but there are traces of activism within the broader mass democratic movement where we're able to trace his activism and sometimes even outside because, you know, Comrade Mlaudi last week when he was here, he says, I started my activism without even knowing that I was doing activism. And I think all of us started there where we were part of um, particular, you know, initiatives within our communities or were involved with 1 or 2 things that had to do with activism. But we didn't know. Only later when we reflect, we realize, oh, Actually, this was part of activism. But I'll move from there, Comrade Manoshe.
No. Maybe before you come in, Comrade Kefense, because you said this is an interaction or conversation amongst
Sure.
ourselves.
Yeah.
Look, Comrade Kefense, we are traceable and in the PYA. Our activism obviously doesn't start within the workers' politics. We are traceable in politics of COSAS. We are traceable in politics of Sanko within our communities. Look. The reality is that what we always advocate is that once you are a worker leader, you can't be a workerist. And if you are a workerist, it simply means that your activism is limited within the shop floor politics. Once you get out of your work-related politics, therefore you can't advance other issues outside your work. So we are members of the ANC Youth League. We have actively participated in politics of COSAS, though some of us were not active in politics of SASCO, but we are rooted in terms of advancing issues of young people outside workers' politics.
No, thank you very much, Comrade Manoshe. At least, luckily, I managed to get that out of you. If there's anything I've achieved today so far, is getting you to actually give us just a brief teaser of, your activism and how you got to be here. And I think that's very important because at the end of the day, as we said, Tintswalo's perspective is also a platform where we give young people such as yourself an opportunity to articulate some of the work that they've been doing in different corners in advancing, the national democratic revolution.
Sure.
You know, so let's delve deeper into this question that you raised, in which COSATU was trying to respond to. In this sense, to say, one, why is it that young people are not attracted to trade unions or are not actively involved in the labor movement? And secondly, we know that workers themselves are not a homogeneous bunch. They're heterogeneous. They have different interests. How do we consolidate those particular interests, and how do we mobilize particularly young people, given that they themselves are not attracted to the labor movement?
Look. Let's start with the first question. Why COSATU had to arrive to a resolution to establish this particular structure. Comrade Kefense, look, the material conditions are no longer the same. And the labor market now is informed by young people who are entering in their numbers. And young people, they ought to be organized. Yes, we can agree that young workers are not a class. Maybe it's a question that we must first clarify. Young workers are not a class within the working class. All right? Young workers are a strata. All right? Now, their challenges, their issues are not equal to challenges of an older generation or someone who was employed around 1980s, 1970s, 1990s. Challenges of young workers of around from your 2000s and, they are different to challenges that were faced by a young person who was employed around the 1980s. All right. So therefore, COSATU has to then be able to say, how do we then organize? How do we then respond to issues that are challenging young workers who are entering the labor market? I will give you an example, Comrade Keffensen. You know, a young person today, and in particular in municipalities, you see, municipalities are one of the sectors that are highly politicized. All right, you will have a young person who has in his position a degree, who has a diploma or any qualification, all right, who qualifies for a particular position in a municipality. But a young person will never be considered or will never be shortlisted on basis of historical backgrounds. So therefore, as young workers, we then had to say, but it is not about that. We then need to be able to professionalize, to say young people must then be able to come in so that they are able to respond to issues of young people, to issues that affect young people, but also to say we need to ensure that we have a youthful federation. We need to also ensure that we create the second layer of leadership. We need, as COSATU, to have a preparatory structure so that we are able to say those that leaves, we don't find a challenge in terms of a succession plan. All right. So it was on those bases that if we say we want a preparatory structure, we are planning or we are ensuring that we have a succession plan that we are able to continue with the sustainability of the federation. You understand? So it is on those bases that COSATU had to arrive at that particular resolution to say, look, comrades, we need to ensure that we prepare the second layer of leadership.
No, I hear you. I hear you. And I do agree that every revolutionary movement that or organization that wants to still be relevant, it has to be deliberate about the involvement of young people and preparing them to take over leadership. But I'm also interested in understanding what could be the reason why young people are not uh, you know uh, interested in participating in the labor movement in trade unions, and how do we link this with the fact that the labor market itself, it's not static, it has moved. I mean, if you look at the time at which these unions were formed, you had a highly industrial mining complex that defined our economy. But since then, you start seeing a transformation, particularly after 1994, where the services sector now has grown big, and particularly the financial services sector. If you look at those sectors' contribution to the GDP, it's continuously growing, and that in itself has changed the labor market. Another thing to consider, which I think we'll delve a bit deeper into it as we converse, is the emergence of new technologies which are really threatening job opportunities. So, do we really have an understanding as to what informs young people's perception towards the labor movement, and how do we respond to it beyond just creating a youth wing? Or even if we create that youth wing, what are some of the strategies that you've considered in attracting young workers who are now in industries that are emerging and that are no longer the same as when these particular unions were formed?
Corporate Kifense, the reality is that young people in general, whether they are directly employed or indirectly employed, young people always play an active role in terms of the their active participation in the economy. Uh, uh, so it was important for COSATU to then agree to say, hey, comrades, look, we need to establish this structure so that we are able to link those that are employed with those that are outside employment. Now, how do we organize them? Remember that, Comrade Kifense, a federation doesn't exist outside trade unions. All right? Now, workers are organized in different sectors. We have workers in the private sector. We have workers in the public sector. All right. So young people who are in employment were not organized. And how do you ensure that there are relations amongst all young people across all sectors? COSATU then had to agree to say, no, comrades, but we can't operate in isolation. Look, you have the ANC that has the ANC Youth League, in which organizes young people. You have the Communist Party that has the YCL. You have COSAS. You have SASCO. But how do we organize the young workers who are entering? How do we prepare those that come from institutions of higher learning to enter the labor market? How do we organize them so that they are then be able to understand that we are in this particular revolution? So it was on those bases that we need to prepare ourselves as COSATU so that we are able to say there is a relationship between those that are actively participating into the economy and those that are not directly participating into the economy. So it was on those bases that let us organize these young workers within this particular affiliates across all sectors so that they then be able to have a relationship, so that they then be able to understand that we still have to advance the struggles of young people outside employment. So the strategy and tactics that COSATU had to apply was to say, let us establish this structure so that we are able to have a link with young people that are outside the labor market, so that we are then be able, because our relationship, remember, COSATU is informed by, look, exist in a tripartite alliance, and that tripartite alliance is informed by the National Democratic Revolution. So you can't have a COSATU that does not have a succession plan. So it was a strategy to say, but look, comrades, we need to prepare ourselves to then be able to sustain this particular revolution we are trying to advocate ourselves.
And in saying that, what has been the response from young workers themselves? Are you seeing young workers being part of your activities? What are some of the key activities that you can point to in which you think are assisting in terms of that particular strategic objective of creating that link? And in terms of the sectors themselves, which of the sectors are you receiving more young people joining the labor unions and also forming part of the Young Workers Forum, COSATU Young Workers Forum? You know, just to get a sense as to, is there an appeal towards young people, and where there isn't, what are the challenges that you're coming across, and how are you planning to resolve those particular challenges?
Comrade Kifense, the reality is that the reception from other affiliates of COSATU, because remember, COSATU is informed by affiliates. The reception is very much concerning, very much worrying. That you see, when you take a conference resolution of COSATU, it therefore means that all 16, by the way, COSATU has 16 affiliates. So if COSATU takes a resolution, Young Workers, it's a national conference resolution of COSATU. Now, you expect that all 16 affiliates of COSATU to be at the forefront of implementing this particular resolution. Now, I hope that I will not be called to order in our upcoming CEC. We still have...
It's a safe space, Mchana. It's a safe space.
Yeah. You still have affiliates of COSATU who do not subscribe to the idea of having this particular young workers structure. All right. So now you can't have COSATU young workers, then you don't have affiliates themselves not having the young workers structure. You need to have SAMU having the young workers structure. You need to have NEHAU having young workers structure. You need to have SATU that have the young worker structure. You need to have POP crew. You need to have Communication Workers Union. You need to have SEPAU. All these affiliates of COSATU ought to abide by this conference resolution, but the reception is not the same. And I will tell you why. The reason is that when I comrade Kefense, you see, by nature, young people, they are young people who always want to take center stage. Young people love popularity. Young people are very much active and revolutionary. So the argument, and I'm happy that Comrade Lula Miller is here. Comrades argue in different affiliates that, but the Labor Relations Act, Comrade Kifense, defines a worker as someone who trades his labor power in exchange of a salary. So you don't have a Labor Relations Act that speaks about a young worker. Instead, you have a Labor Relations Act that speaks about a worker. But if you invite class politics, young people are a strata. Hence, I started to say, if you define young people or young workers are not a class, but they are there to then be able to advocate for the struggles of the young workers. You understand? So there is that particular challenge. Look, I will tell you now, and I can say this if I'm recalled or whatever. In Gauteng, we don't have a structure of COSATU young workers, but of 9 provinces, we have 8 structures of COSATU young workers. So in Gauteng, the reception is very much negative. So we still have a challenge in terms of having to accept that this structure of young workers must be there so that it is able to assist in terms of organizing young people who are entering the labor market. So I will tell you now, you are still finding a challenge, even the constitutionalization of the COSATU Young Workers. I can tell you now, it is only a resolution of the conference, but COSATU Young Workers, it is not a constitutional structure. It doesn't find expression, it doesn't find reflection in the constitution. It is only there to organize, campaign, and all these other issues that seeks to deal with campaigns, but it is not a constitutional structure. And when we advocate for constitutionalization of young workers, we are not talking about autonomy. Autonomy is something different. We don't operate like the ANC Youth League. We don't operate like SASCO. We don't operate like COSAS. We don't enjoy autonomy, but we are merely a substructure of COSATU. We subscribe to the constitution of the federation. So there's that particular contestation in terms of the relevance and the existence of so COSATU Young Workers. That is why even you go to the PYA, I can tell you now, Comrade Kefense, the discussions within the PYA structures, there are PYA components who are not agreeing to the existence of COSATU Young Workers.
Thank you very much, Comrade Manoshe, for outlining some of these challenges you are having in terms of, appealing to young people. But I think I would like to expand that further before we
Yeah,
move on and say, I think there is generally a challenge of young people not having a keen interest in political participation. I mean,
sure.
when you engage a lot of young people, you hear this political apathy, with some of them saying that they are apolitical, and when you tell them to say, but you can't be apolitical, everything that you do and the life that you live is influenced by politics. So, for
Yeah,
instance, I think today petrol costs have gone up. That has political implications, and even that decision is political in itself. Young people, particularly those in private corporate, have to deal with institutional racism, which is very loud yet very subtle. That in itself is politics. Um, and I hope that your affiliates can take this thing serious, because we have a lot of young people who are exploited. They don't even know that they're exploited. Because there's no one who conscientizes them to that reality that there is an
yeah,
exploitation here. I
yeah,
mean, for example, you would have many institutions who don't have sexual harassment policies, and you find young women being sexually exploited in those environments, and no one is saying anything about that. So I just wanted to add to that to say, I think one of the things as a recommendation that you might have to deal with is also having educational campaigns of what rights are there for workers in and of themselves, and why is it important for young people to participate in trade unions. But before I go further, there's a question here from Mantombi Nkosi, which I feel is very important. She
yeah.
says, who forms part of young workers? Is it just based on age? And an extrapolation would be, according to your own assessment, what are the interests of young workers versus the general interests of workers? What are the interests of young workers, collectively? Of course, those interests are not homogeneous in themselves, but if you were to give us, 3 or 5 interests that you think are very relevant to young workers after responding to this question, or who forms part of young workers, and is it just based on age?
No, no, no. You first started to say um, you will come across young workers who are political and all that. Can I start with that? Uh, You know what we have discovered when our comrade Giffens is that we have failed ourselves as COSATU to prioritize political education in our structures. All right, we need to intensify political education within the affiliates of COSATU. All right, that is why the relationship between COSATU and the Communist Party is of paramount importance. The Communist Party is the vanguard of the working class. So therefore, the relationship between COSATU and the Communist Party is of paramount importance. So to find ourselves in a situation where you still have a young person who will say, no, I'm apolitical. I can't form part and parcel of politics and whatever. It is because we have missed this particular historical relationship between COSATU and the party. The relationship of COSATU and the Communist Party is of paramount importance. The Communist Party should therefore take center stage in terms of consciousness of ordinary workers. Communist Party must come in to then be able to conscientize workers in terms of the struggles that workers are engaged in. Because the struggles that we are engaged in as workers is not only shop floor politics where we say you go to a disciplinary hearing, you go to a grievance. We ought to have those class politics so that an ordinary worker is able to understand that we are advancing a class struggle. That's one. Two, the issue of young workers in terms of age. Look, a young person in South Africa, let me put it in this particular fashion. A young person in South Africa is between the ages of 18 to 35. Okay, I know in the youth league you can join the youth league when you are at the age of 14, if I'm correct. But you can't be employed at the age of 14. You are deemed to be still in school at the age of 14. But once you are in the employment, you are 18 to 35. So young workers are between the ages of 18 to 35. So you qualify to be a young worker between the age of 18 to 35. So there's a point that you raised that I want to reflect on. What was the last question that you raised?
Yeah, what is the interest of these workers who are between the age of 18 and 35? What makes them different? Those interests, why are they different from the general interests of workers? And if you can list maybe just 3 or 5 of those particular differences and show us the distinction to say where else a worker who's older would have this particular interest, a young person will have this particular interest. And I mean those interests can cut across industries.
Yeah, look. Let me first start within the federation itself, or within the trade unions. The reality is that affiliates or labor movements, even the federation itself, COSATU, it's finding it difficult to grow. Our trade unions, COSATU itself, it's finding it difficult to grow. All right. Why our trade unions and federations are finding it difficult to grow are primarily because they are no longer appealing to the younger generation that is entering the labor market. So therefore, young people must come in to ensure that we have youthful federation, to ensure that we have youthful trade unions that are then be able to appeal to issues that affect young people. Because if you have a youthful organization like SAMU and HAU, look, it is easy for you to recruit a young person, because my challenges are then going to be able to be equal to the challenges of a person who is 32 years old. All right, that's one. But also, uh, within different sectors, you have young people, young workers, if I may put it, who are entering the labor market, Comrade Giffens, all right, qualified for that particular matter. Degrees, postgraduates, they have diplomas, but they are not considered to occupy those strategic and influential positions because they do not have the historical political background. Therefore, they are not going to be considered to occupy those strategic and influential positions. Therefore, it is the responsibility of COSATU young workers to then be able to say, but instead of having Maphatsoe, who is 50 years old, the company cannot therefore invest on a person that is 50 years. Look, companies in the private sector or in the public sector, they have bursaries that they advertise on whatever. I can tell you, I'm a Metropolis officer, Comrade Kefense. You know, in Tshwane, who benefits in terms of bursaries that are issued by City of Tshwane? Those bursaries benefit a commander in the Metropolis, benefit a director in Metropolis, someone who doesn't even have 15 years in the department. So you can't say that Metropolis must invest on someone who is 58 years. How many years left for that particular person? So we are saying, as young workers, companies, government departments must therefore invest on young people to ensure that this particular person still has time to serve and contribute in that particular department, in that particular company. If bursaries are out, they must benefit young people so that young people can say, oh, no, I still have 20 years in that particular company. You can't have a person who takes a bursary, then who's 58 years. Where is he going to use that particular qualification? Who's 58 years? He's left years. Where is he going to use that particular qualification? So therefore, you have Maphatsoe, who's 33 years. So Maphatsoe can still be utilized or meaningfully contribute into the company in the next 20 years. So those are the issues we are trying to advocate as the young workers.
No, thank you very much, Comrade Maphatsoe. What I'm hearing from you is that, young people have an interest, one, to have career guarantees within the spaces in which they're employed. And also they want support in terms of self-development. And I think that's very important. And one observation to make there is that you find that particularly in the private sector, there are more opportunities for one to develop themselves. In fact, I would know, speaking to a number of friends who are in the public sector, who say part of our KPIs is that we must have, done this course and that course by the end of the year, and all of these things are paid for; they are free. And when you look at that against the public sector, you find that the public sector does not have many opportunities for people to develop themselves. And as you are saying, where those opportunities are, there is a lot of gatekeeping. And maybe another thing to add in there, since this is a conversation, I think another important matter that we need to put to the table when it comes to uh, young workers, I think it's also the issue of deracializing working space, particularly in the private sector, because as I said, institutional racism within the private sector is very rare, and you would know that in fact, unionization in the private sector is discouraged at all cost. But when you engage with a lot of our colleagues, they would tell you about the subtle racism, how they are overlooked when it comes to promotions, and even patriarchal tendencies. I mean, young women suffer a lot of, toxic masculinity within the working spaces. There's a lot of sexual harassment. As I said, some of these institutions don't even have policies on how to resolve some of those issues. So I think those are some of the tables that some of the issues that you must take and put on the table, and even some of the spaces that you need to also be able to participate. Now, I want to ask you another interesting question, right? To say, um, given that young people are considering entrepreneurship, more than actually getting jobs. I mean, more and more young people are considering being entrepreneurs. In fact, young people would prefer to be entrepreneurs and have multiple streams of income instead of actually being employed at a particular company. How should unions engage with those type of young people on the following issues? One, on conscientizing them on the importance of entrepreneurship itself, because I firmly believe that, in fact, in this day and age, entrepreneurship in whatever form is the highest form of activism, because in part it assists us to respond to the question of unemployment, of which young people are most affected. But secondly, on the level of, now I'm a boss, right? And I'm using the word boss quite frivolously, right? To say I'm a boss, how should I ensure that I create a better working condition for the people that I employ, particularly young people, right? Now I'm no longer
Yeah,
a worker who demands a better working space. I'm the one who
yeah.
must be responsible of creating that space. So how should unions engage young people on those two levels?
Look, uh, um, and I will respond to this in brief. Deracialization and all that in the private sector. In brief, uh, the reality is that corporate is one of the most exploitative sector you can find. That is why even in the retail sector, you have a labor movement or a trade union called SACAO. All right. In the retail sector, you still have uh, workers who are not organized or who do not enjoy representation from labor movements. Uh, Sakau itself, I don't know why Sakau doesn't enjoy powers to do that within the private sector. Uh, go to Shoprite, go to Pick and Pay, go to Woolworths. All these retail companies, majority of them, Comrade Kifenze, are young workers, are young people. Go to the call centers, your Vodacom and whatever. They are not organized. They are not. Because the private sector itself, they've developed that particular tendency you know, and you have in the private sector, in the retail company, you will have someone who's what do you call these people who pack stock or whatever there, who pack there, stock,
Merchandisers,
whatever.
those are merchandise.
Merchandisers, yes. By the way, I used to work in a company, a retail company here in Northgate. All right, in Northgate called Trappers. They dealt with outdoor. So you'd find, you spoke about deracialization. You find yourself being there for the past 5 years. All right. But you'll find a white person coming in to supervise you. You have 5 years experience. A white person will come and be your supervisor. You know why is that? It's because workers' rights in those particular companies, they are not recognized. Labor Relations Act is not recognized. All these particular workers' rights in those particular private companies or retail, bargaining, retail, they are not. So we need to then be able to infiltrate and forcefully so those particular retail companies, in particular in the private sector, to say we ought to have labor movements that organize workers in. Hey, Chief, go one of Chief go to ShopRite. They don't even have lunch there. Lunch is 15 minutes. You eat while standing up, you come back, and you just continue with your work. So those are some of the things that the young workers must then be able to raise within this worker struggle, to say we ought to then be able to liberate workers in those private sector. So we need to assist Sakau. And what was your other question?
I was asking, how do we engage young people who are interested in entrepreneurship? One
Oh yes. Look,
yeah.
Comrade Kefense. COSATU Young Workers was not established just to be there. The challenge of being of leading this particular structure, I will tell you, and you said this is an open discussion. COSATU Young Workers it's not even appreciated by those who are even leading COSATU Young Workers. But if COSATU Young Workers was appreciated, COSATU Young Workers must have a relationship with the National Youth Development Agency, the NYTA. All right? To then be able to say, we have young people who are in entrepreneurship, who are then going to be able to be employers in their nature, who are then be able to employ young people to come in. We need to advocate as young workers to say, but we have young entrepreneurs. How do we then advocate for themselves to then be able? Because you can have young people who are having ideas in terms of businesses, but they lack sufficient funding. It is therefore the responsibility of COSATU Young Workers to assist these young entrepreneurs through all these institutions that are created to assist these young entrepreneurs to be able to then make it into this particular sector. NYTA is one of the institutions that COSATU young workers must have a closer relationship with. I know that in the local government we have a structure called National Youth Government, something like that, that seeks to then uplift and project and expose all these young people who are entrepreneurs who want to make business with the local government. So COSATU young workers must then establish a stronger relationship with young people who are into entrepreneurship, expose them into opportunities that are given by the NYTA. It must not only be the NYTA. COSATU young workers must then be able to identify all these young people who are into entrepreneurship, to then say these are the opportunities that are given by NYTA to assist, to uplift, to then be able to then say young people come into entrepreneurship. So I'm saying to you, Comrade Kifenze, COSATU young workers must identify young people that are into entrepreneurship and expose them into opportunities that are given by the NYTA.
Thank you very much, Comrade Manoshe, for your responses. I think we're over an hour now, and I think maybe we'll just ask the last question and give you an opportunity to give your closing remarks. I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and I'm glad that the witchcraft of network did not attack us today. I prayed very hard. I prayed very hard, I must say, to say we must not see those challenges. And I know that, comrades, an hour, it's a short time, especially for our viewers. And we'll consider extending by 30 minutes in our next session so that we can exhaust some of these issues. But thank you for joining in. I've been sharing some of your comments on the screen. Comrade Mantombi Nkosi, Comrade True Boy, Mingas Khatebe, Oratebe, Comrade Carol Matlo, Comrade Lulamile, all of you, we see you, and thank you very much for joining the space. Now, on the last question, I think it would be important, Comrade Manoshe, to even attempt to create some sort of a political education curriculum for people who want to be entrepreneurs, because we often talk about support, but we never bring these issues of, how to create a good working space for people that we employ, how to create a conducive institutional culture of the organizations that we build, and how to ensure as well that as we make profit, we also play our part in terms of, the broader objectives of the revolution. I mean, when you look at the corporate social responsibility space, it's one space that we don't often talk about, and I think it's one of the spaces that we need to bring to the fore, particularly when we speak about entrepreneurs, to know that even as they develop their businesses, at some point they'll have an obligation to invest in the development of communities upon which they make those profits. So I think that will be very important. But the last question I want to ask you, and maybe I'll ask you to try and open your camera as you give your closing remarks so that people can see you, is that when we look at the last 30 years, and the work that has been done, particularly by the governing party, the African National Congress, do we feel workers are in a better position than they were prior this past 30 years? I mean, when you consider issues of the minimum wage that has been introduced, the recognition of unions legally, the amendments that have been done to the Labor Relations Act. When we look at all of that, can you say that the experience of workers entirely has improved from what it was pre-1994?
Comrade Kifense, I, by the way, thought that you were going to start with this particular question. But I understand that at some point we must then be able to balance all these things. Look, Comrade Kiffensen, if you look at the 30 years of the progressive workers' rights under the ANC-led government, the reality is that all these progressive laws that workers enjoy today, it is as a result of the African National Congress-led government. You can talk about the establishment of the Commission for Conciliation and, the CCMA. You can talk about the Labor Relations Act. You can talk about, I can talk about COIDA now. I can talk about the national minimum wage. I can talk about the national health insurance. I can talk about, now we are talking about the two-pot system. I can talk about, by the way, the right to strike. I can talk about bargaining councils. I can talk about all these labor laws that we enjoy, Comrade Giffens. It is as a result of the African National Congress-led government, primarily because the ANC itself subscribes to the National Democratic Revolution. The ANC-led government is biased towards the left. Okay? Now, we were not going to enjoy all these particular rights as workers if we can, if it was not because of the ANC. Yes, let's agree, Comrade Kiffense. Our relationship as workers with the ANC has its own shortfalls. Let's agree. The undermining of the collective agreements, and Kosato at some point spoke about the attack towards the collective bargaining and all that. But what we enjoy today, it is as a result of the government of the African National Congress. I will make an example, Comrade Kifensi. In Tshwane today, Comrade Kifensi, Tshwane as a municipality is led by a DA-led coalition. All right? Now, I'm talking about the municipality, local government, not national government, local government. There's what we call a collective agreement that was agreed upon at a national level in 2021 that municipal workers in Tshwane qualify for, it's a 3-year or a multi-year agreement. 2021 municipal workers in Tshwane qualified for a 3.5 salary increase. In 2022 and 2023 qualified for a 4.9 increase. In 2023, 2024 qualified for a 5.4 salary increase. But because the DA has a national resolution that the public sector, the public sector, the salary of the public sector is bloated, they undermined that particular resolution. Today, we are sitting with a DA-led coalition that dismissed more than 100 employees. All right? We are sitting with employees in Tshwane that have not received their salary increase. And you know why? You see, the ANC has its own mistakes, not mistakes per se, but because of certain individual employees. Yes, let's agree. We have employees of the ANC that behaves as if they are above the organization, failing to understand that the ANC exists because of the people. All right. Now in Tshwane, when it was Putla, for example, Hossein Ramokgopa, we didn't find SAMU as a labor movement going to a strike for a 0% salary increase. You'd find workers going to a strike on basis that workers do not agree on a certain percentage. All right. The agreement says workers must get 9%. ANC will say, no, it's fine, we'll give you 6%. But with the DA-led coalition, they have approved a council budget that says 0%. So the point I'm trying to drive is that workers enjoy these rights, right to strike, right to bargaining council, and where workers have the opportunity to go and have the opportunity to raise their grievances, COIDA, compensation of injuries on duty. You have the NHI today. You have your two. You know why do we have the two-pot system? By the way, we have a two-pot system
Comrade
because
Manoshe, I will stop you there because of time.
yes,
And I just ask you to give your closing remarks. I think
yes,
the point is driven that, in fact, workers today are better off because of the efforts of the governing
the
party, and
ANC.
where the governing party loses power, we see a regression of some of those privileges that have been secured over the years. And I think that's a
Yeah.
very important point, especially when workers consider who they should vote for. Those are some of the things that they should consider. So, but I would like you in just 2 minutes to give us your closing remarks so that at least at quarter past, we can close off the space. And as I asked before, if you can try and switch on your camera so that people can see you. There are some who did not join us in the beginning and may not understand why you had to switch off your camera. We're just trying to anticipate these network challenges. So you can just give your closing remarks, my brother. And once again, thank you so much for giving us your time and elaborating on some of these issues that we've spoken about, particularly on this important day, which is Workers' Day. So your closing remarks, my brother, in thanking our people for joining us and being part of this conversation.
No, Comrade Keffens, it might not even be 2 minutes. But my closing remarks are going to be biased, given that I am from a Workers' Day where we're celebrating the struggles of the workers, what workers have contributed into shaping the democracy that we enjoy today. But my closing remarks are that when a Comrade Keffens, there is no reason why workers should not vote for the African National Congress. But equally having to appreciate the challenges that the ANC as the governing party has came across. But we must then be able to say, what has the governing party achieved in the 30 years of democracy? Mine is that the African National Congress, as a liberation movement, as a revolutionary organization, as the governing party, all young workers, all young people must then be able to rally behind the African National Congress to then be able to protect and defend the gains of the National Democratic Revolution. Because failure to defend the gains of the National Democratic Revolution, we will then be able to find ourselves in a situation where all what we have advocated for, all what we have fought for as COSATU, which is a federation, will then be reversed. So let us rally behind the African National Congress. Let us find space to rectify where the ANC has failed within the constitutional structures of the African National Congress, because failure to do that will then be able to reverse the gains of the National Democratic Revolution. So therefore, it is our responsibility as young workers of COSATU, as workers organized by COSATU and all affiliates, to then fail to defend the gains of the National Democratic Revolution. Let us defend the Labor Relations Act. Let us defend all these particular acts that the African National Congress have been able to then be able to say, let us enjoy. So let us go and vote for the African National Congress in defense of the National Democratic Revolution.
No, thank you very much, my brother, for joining us once again. I like where you ended, because next week, in fact, we're having Dr. Cde Manoshe just to reflect on advancing the National Democratic Revolution in the last 30 years. Where are we? And is it still a relevant revolution to pursue? How should we reimagine it? So our viewers they must stay tuned for that. Next week we'll be engaging on that part where you left off of defending the National Democratic Revolution. I think even if you go and listen to President Thabo Mbeki's reflections yesterday, where he speaks of a counter-revolutionary threat, which was informed by people who saw the National Democratic Revolution and interpreted it as a threat to the capitalist establishment and white privilege, and therefore working tirelessly to ensure that this thing does not succeed. And their efforts, including weakening the African National Congress, both within and without. I think that particular reflection is very important. In fact, I would encourage our people to go and engage it. It's there on YouTube. There are some groups which are circulating his speech yesterday, so that when we come back next week and have this conversation, you can get a broader context of what are we talking about. But thank you very much, Comrade Manoshe. Thank you very much to the COSATU young workers for borrowing us their time through you to engage with us about these issues. And they will be in touch for future programs. So thank you very much, my brother. Thank you very much to all who joined us today. That was Tintswalo's Perspective, the second episode. As we said, this particular platform is about young people who want to express views about the work that they do, and also just to reflect on 30 years of our democracy. Today was Workers' Day, so we thought it's important to actually engage about the struggles of workers and how far we've come in advancing those struggles. As you heard, it's important to defend the revolution, and that includes voting for the African National Congress. That is because we heard that it seems that where the African National Congress loses its governing position, workers' rights tend to be regressed. And Swan was used as an example. But also we heard that we need to keep conscientizing young people to ensure we heighten their political consciousness, because there is this thing of political apathy amongst young people, which tends to be propagated in this concept of apoliticalism, which I struggle to relate with, because everything is political. But there's also a need to find ways to attract young people into our political spaces. We need to interrogate this question: why young people are not engaged in, political activities, whether it's the labor movement, whether it's political parties themselves, and even the engagement with policy. Because even when you look at submissions on policies and bills that are introduced in parliament, the comments from young people is relatively low. Even voter apathy itself. I mean, we're going into elections, and voter apathy is still a reality. And it's not just a unique reality to South Africa, but it's a global concern that young people are not actively participating in political activities. So let us encourage young people, particularly going to these elections, to go and vote. It's very important that youth vote. It's very, very important. We want young people to go out there in their numbers to vote. We will be launching a challenge, some of us, where we'll be creating our own squads so that when we go vote, I can go there with my voting squad. I don't go alone. And this thing is very important because if you look at, for instance, what people, when they go vote, they take their families with, even that old lady and that grandpa that is at the old age, they go and fetch them so that when they go and vote, they go together. Not as young people, I encourage you guys, create those voting squads, take pictures with them to say, now this is my voting squad. I have these 10 young people that I'm going to vote with at my voting station so that we can make this thing of voting cool. It can become a cool thing that I've voted, and becomes cool that you've voted. And some people want to be, in that position of having voted. Even those who have not registered, when the next elections come, they can say, no, now I want to have a voting squad and go and vote with. With that being said, thank you very much for joining us. We apologize for going over time, but there can never be enough time for these conversations. Join us next week as we have our third episode. As I've already alluded, we're going to have Dr. Kwezi Mabasa, and we'll be reflecting on how far we've gone in terms of advancing the National Democratic Revolution. Have yourselves a good night and a great week ahead. Let's get those goals ticked off our lists. Let's be productive. Let's do meaningful work, and so that when Friday comes and we have fun, we don't have regret. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you next week.